month begin.
Hi, I'm Lil.
And I'm Fitz.
And this is Not Once for Yes with your regular dose of the spooky and the kooky. So Fitz, do you want to give us a little rundown of what's coming up on today's episode?
I'd love to. We have multiple pings on the paranormal radar. We have an update on the anniversary of a local historical haunting. We've got lots of fantastic spooky stories from our listeners. And we've been on a Paranormal Postcards adventure to the seaside.
We have, because it is summer after all.
Unfortunately, we did not wear the traditional rolled-up trousers and knotted handkerchief,
No,
as required by British law in summertime.
But we're a bit too classy for that, darling.
Before we get into that, we'd like to say a big thank you to our latest patrons, Marianne Galimberto and Shannon Corsi. Thank you so much for donating. Your donations really do help make the show better.
We really want to give a big thank you to our supporters. And if you want to check out more about becoming our patron, hop over to the Patreon site at patreon.com/KOFY to see what your money would go towards.
So, Lil, what's pinged the paranormal radar this month?
Well, there has been one news story hitting the paranormal headlines this month, and it's actually a job advert, which is a little bit unusual. It's an advert for a live-in nanny role for a couple in the Scottish borders looking after 2 children. You'd spend 4 nights a week working away from home, but you have 28 days holiday, free accommodation in a historic home with your own room, kitchen and bathroom, looking after 2 young children in a friendly family for the lovely salary of £50,000 a year.
If you're into that sort of thing, sounds perfect. What's the catch?
The catch is, and this is why it's twice the going rate for a nannying job, is that the last 5 nannies have quit due to the paranormal activity in the house.
Oh, crikey.
Yes. Now, the couple have been quite upfront about this. Obviously, this is all stated in the actual job advert, which is really unusual. And credit to them, to be honest, for being so upfront about it. Basically, when they bought the house 10 years ago, they were warned that it was haunted. And they decided to keep an open mind, but they bought it anyway, and they've never experienced anything themselves. But 5 nannies have left the role in the last year, each citing supernatural incidents as the reason, including strange noises, broken glass, and furniture moving. So they're very keen to secure a long-term nanny as soon as possible, but decided to be quite honest about the possible complications of the job, which I think is fair enough.
Yeah, honesty is always the best policy.
Definitely.
I'm intrigued to know, though, what the nannies that have already been and left are putting on their CVs for future applications. so, what caused you to finish your last form of employment? Well, there was a ghost.
Yeah, it doesn't sound very good, does it? I think in that situation you'd make something up.
But then I suppose if your previous employer's willing to back you up on the record...
Well, yeah, exactly. I mean, these people do seem very genuine. Obviously, the advertisers of the job were a little bit sceptical to start with. They say, when we saw the advert, we were stunned. Some of the guys at HQ were sceptical. But apparently, after talking to the family, they realised that they were genuine, although they do say that it is one of the most unusual stories they've ever heard from their clients. Now, I believe you've got a story to bring to the Paranormal Radar today.
Indeed. For those of you that follow Week in Weird, and indeed for those of you that don't,
You should.
You should, because it's
'Cause they're
fascinating.
awesome.
They have some great stories. They post regular videos and blog posts, and they also run a paranormal museum. Not only a paranormal museum, but a travelling paranormal museum.
It's awesome. I so want to see it.
Basically, they collect haunted objects and they travel around America, as far as I'm aware at the moment, America and Canada, and put on displays at sort of conventions and various other things. What they're also doing now is they're trying to 3D scan the objects they have to record them, basically.
Yeah.
And one of the first they tried was an idol that gives people nightmares, apparently.
That they affectionately call Billy.
Now, Billy is a sort of carved wooden idol, and again, I would say he's supposed to give people nightmares. And they were attempting to 3D scan it, so they got the equipment set up and they positioned him on a table, they've got the scanner, and when they start to try and scan his face, there was something in front of his face that was blocking the scan. You could see sort of the shoulders and the body, but there was like a sort of circle of just interference over his face.
It was really weird. And however they moved the scanner, or whatever the device is called, I'm not sure, the covering that was blocking it moved in accordance. It was the most bizarre thing. It was just literally like he did not want to be scanned and was putting up some kind of a barrier that was in the way.
Yeah, it was literally like a kind of force field, or just like somebody was holding a plate up in front of the scanner. It was kind of circular and literally just completely blocked the scan. It was really intriguing. It
was a bit mind-blowing. And the only way they managed to get him scanned in the end was to do an EVP session with the idol and explain to him what they were doing. And I thoroughly recommend you go over to the Week in Weird website and check out that video, because the EVP session is just astonishing.
Yeah, I'll be putting a link in the description for you so you can just click straight on there and have a look, and I really do recommend it.
It is a full-on conversation.
Yeah, they get some responses, and basically sort of the response is, I don't want to be scanned, and
will it hurt?
Will it hurt? I don't know what you're doing.
He swears at them at one point.
Yeah, and they basically have to bribe him. I think it was with tobacco, wasn't it? They have to bribe him to let the scan happen. But once they've done that, it scans fine.
Yeah. It's just the most amazing thing.
It was fascinating. And it took, I think, 30 hours in the end, with all the negotiations and what have you, to get it scanned. Whereas I think a normal scan would take sort of 30 minutes.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah, it was incredible. Do go and check that out.
And so, on to the final ping of our paranormal radar this month, which is an update on the historical haunting at Naseby. Fans of the show will remember that we talked about the local legend of the replay in the sky of the Battle of Naseby on the anniversary of the battle, which is on June the 14th. We were hoping to visit the site on the date, but unfortunately we had some technical difficulties with the vehicle and were unable to attend.
Which conked out. That's what technical difficulties means.
Yes, technical difficulties was a replacement radiator. For those of you that are interested. It's all now fixed, and whilst researching the show today, we actually found that the date of the battle was pre the change from the Julian to the Gregorian calendar.
So it would have been no use whatsoever us going out on June the 14th?
Because it wouldn't have been the anniversary of the battle, which we have today discovered is actually the 27th of June. So we haven't quite missed it.
Not quite.
Now, we're hoping to get out there, and if we do, we'll give you an update next episode.
We will indeed. Now, you may also remember that one of the reports was from 1949, when a young couple cycled out to the Naseby to have a picnic. They were neither of them aware of the anniversary battle at the time, and they saw something very strange indeed. And I have just come across their written reports, which I have never read before and got very excited by. So we thought it would be rather nice to celebrate the anniversary of the Battle of Naseby haunting by reading you those reports now. Now, the reason they wrote them down was because they thought that the events were so strange that neither one of them would believe the other. So instead, they noted down their experiences to compare later. So we have the man's perspective and the lady's perspective. So Fitz, if you would like to read us the man's report now.
I shall. He's quite terse in his reporting, so it doesn't go on for long.
The lady's a little more flowery.
Impossibly hot and humid, not a breath of wind. You could feel the stillness. Even the birds made no sound. Sprawling in the grass, the hairs on the back of my neck began to bristle. Cornfield and grass was silent. What could have been an old drover's road suddenly became filled with figures. Low wooden carts pulled by tired, dusty, weary men passed by. Chains hung from the carts. What they were for, I don't know. No sound from men nor carts as they moved slowly by. I suppose what really made me feel I was a witness to some bygone age was the recognition of a kind of uniform the men appeared to be wearing. Not dashing cavaliers, just impossibly exhausted men.
Oh, and you did it in your 1950s voices as well. Well done.
One was in character, darling.
Okay, my turn.
Will you be reading in character as well?
I don't. We'll see. Okay, so the ladies' report. On the 14th of June 1949, my boyfriend, now my husband, and myself took sandwiches and lemonade and cycled to Naseby. We pushed our bikes some way along a bridleway and sat down on the grass, leaning back against a haystack. The day was, well, peculiar is the only word, so hot and heavy that the light seemed almost purple. We kicked off our shoes, ate our sandwiches, and argued lazily. Me, that I should expire if we didn't get a storm to clear the air. He, that he could happily manage with weather like that forever. Then I suddenly realised that there were men looking at me. No, that's not true. They were completely ignoring me. They were walking on either side of a wagon. 4 men, perhaps 5. The wagon was very heavy and wooden, with chains looped along its sides. It was flat and oblong, just like a heavy board on wheels. There were no horses. The men must have been pushing it. They were dressed in black leather jerkins and boots, grim-faced and so weary that the perspiration had run down their faces, streaking them. There were certainly no cavaliers with fancy plumes. Roundheads, possibly. The dress was similar to paintings I have seen. The impression was of older men, the rearguard of an army, or even local villagers. However, my main feeling was embarrassment. We seemed so frivolous, so carefree in that sad company. We must have broken some record in regaining the public road and making our way home.
Spiffing. How very famous 5 go ghost hunting.
I mean, they're fantastic reports and I really was so excited to find them. But my goodness, does the 50s come through in those stories.
I thought I should expire. Oh, it's fantastic.
I love it.
But it is interesting that the reports are basically identical when you get down to it.
Yes.
And obviously she's a little bit more verbose than he was.
But the descriptions, I mean, especially with the cart, with chains, very, very, well, identical.
Yeah, really. They were obviously reporting the same thing.
Very much so, yeah, which does lend a lot of credibility to the story.
Well, that about sums up the Paranormal Radar for this month, and we're going to go straight into a spooky story from one of our listeners. Those of you that were listening last month will remember Pamela Ennis of the Pacific Coast Spirit Watch, and she's got another story for us of a haunted aircraft carrier.
My daughter Misty and I are docents on the USS Hornet and help with the History Mystery overnight tours. Our last visit happened on January the 27th, 2017. For the most part, the evening was like any other. We had 3 docents and 4 guests on our team. We didn't get any K2 hits, but we did have many interactions using a flashlight throughout and from using a pendulum in the chapel area. In the engine room, we can usually contact Stella, the resident canine spirit mascot on the ship. Stella was the companion of one of the volunteers who helped to get the Hornet in shape when she first came to Alameda in her museum role. She brought her on the ship while working on getting ready for her big unveil on October 17th, 1998. I'm not sure if Stella passed on the ship, but we have all heard her bark and whine during various investigations. But on that Friday, we were unable to get her to respond. My daughter and I sleep in the JOB, or Junior Officers' Bunks, when we're working the overnight tours. The JOB is located towards the forecastle of the ship, where the anchors are located. I chose to sleep in Bunk 11, one of the most haunted bunks on the ship. I've learned from previous encounters to ask permission to use the bunk, and I did so. Around 2 a.m, we decided to turn in. I climbed into the bunk and put on my earphones to listen to meditations. Late at night, the sounds heard in this area can be disturbing. Walking, talking, and working when there is no rational explanation. I fell asleep, and my iPod must have shut off sometime during the night. Although the sounds were completely muffled, I could hear a dog barking. I wasn't surprised. Darn it, Stella, now you decide to say hi. Then I realised that this wasn't her usual bark. This was an alert bark. It sounded like what your dog would do when they're protecting you or your property. Okay, I thought. The bunks in the JOB are enclosed with boards to the back. They're made of wood, and each set of 4 bunks consists of 2 stacked bunks facing each other with the entryway between. I was lying on my side, facing the wall, with my back towards the bunk opening. Just as I was trying to slip back into sleep, I felt a hand, a full hand on my hip. Firm pressure sliding down from my hip towards my knee. I froze. Do I turn over and see who it is? I don't think so. I played possum and did a slight twitch, and it stopped. You'd think after investigating for about 5 years, I would have rolled right over and said hello, but I didn't. I'm still working on processing what happened. I think what bothers me is the complete feeling of vulnerability. It isn't going to deter me, but I will from this point forward make a point of saying prior to sleep, please do not touch me while I'm sleeping.
Before we even start discussing how interesting this story is, I just have to say how jealous I am that they have such an amazing venue to work at.
Oh, I know, me too.
If we ever find ourselves within 100 miles of the place, I'm definitely booking us on one of these tours.
Oh, absolutely, would not miss that for the world.
And you get the bonus of a spectral guard dog that protects you from handsy ghosts.
Stella sounds fantastic, doesn't she?
She does. I must say, I've had quite a few personal experiences, but I've never been in a situation where something has physically touched me, or at least not to my recollection. So I really struggle to think how vulnerable that must make you feel.
Definitely. I think that must be pretty scary. And it's great that it sounds like you and Stella, Pam, have got quite a connection going on there. It really sounds to me like she was trying to look out for you and warn you that something was going to happen. I'd be interested to know, you said about in the future you'd be setting boundaries with any entities that may be present about not disturbing you when you're asleep. And I wonder, have you slept there since then and did that work? Because I imagine that for other people in a haunted location like this that might be feeling quite vulnerable, whether that would be really, a very wise thing to do, to verbally set some quite clear boundaries about what is not acceptable. So I'd love to hear how that went, really.
So, thank you very much to Pamela Ennis of Pacific Coast Spirit Watch for sending in that story. We do love hearing about your investigations, and we hope that you'll continue to share your adventures with us in future.
Now, we do have some more stories coming up, but just before we get into those, as you know, we love listening to podcasts as much as we enjoy making them, and from time to time we like to share those podcasts with our listeners.
And if you're into your true crime, you can't do much better than the Minds of Madness.
What could an American dad, a university professor, and a passenger on a bus possibly have in common? You can find out by listening to the Minds of Madness podcast, where we uncover the series of events and state of mind leading ordinary people to do unthinkable things. The Minds of Madness is available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Play, Stitcher, and all other major podcast apps.
Do go and check that out, guys. We think you are very much going to love it. But for now, back to our stories for today, and this one is from Kerry Schroeder. In the springtime of 2005, after we'd been dating almost a year, my boyfriend Brian and I went on a short vacation to New Orleans. We stayed in this gorgeous old hotel called the Place d'Armes in the historic French Quarter. At around 2 or 3 a.m, I was woken up by Brian sitting up in bed yelling. He was visibly upset and pointing to the corner of the room, yelling, "Oh my God, we have to help him! Oh my God!" When I looked to the corner of the room, there was nothing there. I asked him what he was talking about and tried to gently wake him up, but he kept sobbing. "Oh God, please help! Fire! Help!" I was terrified, but it was also as if he couldn't hear me at all. There was no fire, and he was yelling so loud that I was sure the neighbours in the hotel would complain. Then suddenly, after a minute or so, he just fell back into bed and was sound asleep. I woke him up, of course, and he had no idea what I was talking about. He accused me of just having a nightmare. The rest of the New Orleans trip was fun, and nothing weird happened. I convinced myself that he'd just had a night terror, or was talking in his sleep. But a few days later, we went on a walking ghost tour. The guide led us through the French Quarter and pointed out all the haunted places. And, to our horror, he stopped in front of our hotel. The tour guide said that the hotel used to be a schoolhouse that burned down, and that many children died there because there was only one staircase out of the building. He told us that the fire was so horrific that it was actually used as a case to create laws to enforce emergency exits in buildings. My boyfriend and I were horrified and told the guide what had happened to us. But all the guide said was, "Yeah, we hear stories like that all the time from that place." The second incident that convinced me that Brian was not just talking in his sleep was in our home in Las Vegas in maybe 2006 or 7. It was around 3 a.m. and I was woken up by Brian sitting up in bed, talking loudly. He was saying, "Wake up! There's someone in the bed with us." So I jumped up and turned on the table lamp, but there was no one there. He kept repeating, "She's in the bed. Who is she?" So then I was scared, and I asked him, "What are you talking about? There's no one there." He said, "Beth, there's someone in the bed." And that is when I felt my blood run cold. My name is not Beth, and I realised he was not even talking to me. He was talking to the other, empty side of the bed and pointing at me. I mustered up all my courage and asked him, "Who's Beth? Are you okay?" He turned to face me and looked absolutely terrified of me. He said, "What do you want? Just leave us alone." I was very shaken, and I said his name. "Brian?" He looked at me with absolutely no recognition on his face, and then he asked, "Who's Brian?" I figured it was one thing not to recognise me when he was sleep-talking, but it was entirely different to have no response to his own name. I was so scared to be in the room with him that I ended up just going into the living room and watching TV until sunrise. In the morning, he woke me up and had no memory of the event. As far as I know, there was no unusual history about our house, and that was the only time anything like that happened there. The last creepy incident that I experienced with him was in London, and it was actually very validating for me because I had a witness to the sleep talking this time, as my boyfriend never ever remembered any of the incidents, and there were more than I'm telling here. In the winter of 2009, Brian, our roommate Jill, and I went on a trip to Europe. We stayed in a hostel in London. I can't remember the name of it, but I know that it was within walking distance of the British Museum. This happened on either our first or second night there, and we were still a bit jet-lagged. I woke up to Brian jumping out of the bed and running across the room to turn on the light. The light woke up our roommate Jill too, and we were both confused and asking Brian what was going on. He was frantic, muttering to himself, and started putting on his shoes as if he was going out. Jill was more annoyed than scared and was asking, "Dude, what are you doing?" This next part is so crazy to me, even now. We're Americans from the West Coast. We have very obvious Western American accents. When we were in this hostel in London, and Brian was frantically getting dressed in the middle of the night, he started speaking with a British accent. He was very flustered and saying, "Hurry, we're going to be late. Come on, get to it." My roommate and I just looked at each other, both confused and scared. Jill told him, "It's the middle of the night. Where are you going?" And Brian answered, very matter of fact, as if it were a dumb question, and still with a thick British accent. "St. Vincent's. We're going to be late if you don't hurry." A few seconds later, he just sort of snapped out of it and was suddenly very confused. He asked in his regular voice, "How the hell did I get over here?" Our roommate was so scared that she ended up going downstairs and just hanging out in the common room for a while. And even though I was also scared, I was a little relieved that someone else had finally witnessed Brian's weird sleep possessions. I don't know London well, and never bothered to look up what or where St. Vincent's was, or if it was nearby. I almost didn't want to know.
That was some marvellous method acting of a British accent there, darling.
Oh, thank you, I try. It's a shame my Western American accent wasn't quite so good, though.
No, I can't do an American accent either, unfortunately.
I don't think we should try.
No. That was an amazing set of stories.
Absolutely fascinating.
I have no idea what to even call it. Is it sleep medium, sleep possession?
I don't know. Or is it just the fabric of the buildings and the environment affecting him? Mind you, she did say that in their house that they lived in, there was no history of unusual occurrences, though.
It's just very strange, but the fact that there's corroborating evidence to go along with it.
And witnesses.
Yeah, the fire at New Orleans. But again, this is the other thing. When they spoke to the tour guide, and the tour guide said, this sort of thing happens all the time.
Yeah, he seemed completely unsurprised by that turn of events.
Yeah, but it obviously affects Brian at other locations as well.
Yeah, it sounds like he's got a particular sensitivity, but maybe only in that sort of sleeping, dreaming state.
Yeah, definitely. Especially if he's sort of, this it's rubbish, this doesn't happen, and then it's like, really does.
Yeah. And Kerry, I know you said you kind of didn't want to know whether there was any connection to the St. Vincent's, but I'm afraid I could not resist. Being a bit of a research geek as I am, I had to have a look, as I'm sure you've suspected. I know you said you didn't know quite where you were staying, you couldn't remember the name of the street, but that it was within walking distance of the British Museum. So I had a look, and there is, in fact, a St. Vincent Street, not far at all from the British Museum, and on St. Vincent Street there is a St. Vincent's School, and that has existed there on its current site since 1938, just prior to the outbreak of the Second World War. And in 1938 you would not have wanted to have been late for school.
I think all three sort of mini stories were really interesting, but the one that really creeped me out was when he was in the bed and he saw her and was not recognising her and didn't know who he knew who he was, but it wasn't him.
But the name wasn't, it didn't ring any bells of recognition with him at all. That's really terrifying.
I can't imagine what that would be like, to see your partner looking terrified of you, calling someone else, who are you? What are you doing in my room? And speaking to somebody that isn't there and saying, this crazy woman's in my room, sort of thing. That would.
Yeah, that's really chilling.
Oh, I would not want to be in that situation.
No, but a truly amazing and chilling story. And thank you, Kerry, very much for sharing that with us. Now, from one chilling story to another, whilst we have been very lucky in our lives to have had mainly positive experiences with paranormal, as you are all aware, that is so often not the case, unfortunately, and some hauntings become very serious and quite deeply traumatic, and this next story is one of those cases. This is from Rachel Gleave in Yorkshire. It was the winter of 1985. I was 11 years old, and my grandmother, had just died. My mother and I had to move to a new home, and we didn't have a penny between us. The house was a small, 2-bedroom terraced house on a council estate in Heckmondwike, West Yorkshire. There was an old cemetery a few streets away. I come from a long line of sensitives, and I was raised with the shared knowledge of the paranormal. We have seen many things, but never anything like what we were to experience over the next 7 years. Upon moving in, we didn't notice a thing wrong about the place. Making a home from nothing took up much of our time and also took a lot out of us. The house was large and quiet, but hard to heat and very cold. It started with banging noises from the attic. Maybe just the wind, we thought. Large cold spots on the landing. Smells that came from nowhere. Things started going missing. My school shoes, decorative ornaments, books, trinkets, all would be found at the bottom of the garden, underneath an overhanging bush. Petty little things. People in the street would see a woman waving at them from an upstairs window, in her 60s, with grey hair and a nice, cheerful face. They would come to us and ask, "Who's the old woman staying with you?" Of course, there was no one staying with us. Many friends, when visiting, would see her on the stairs, and even in the bathroom when they went to use the loo. We never told anyone about her unless they experienced her themselves. We named her Martha, and she never gave us any trouble. One day, a neighbour took us aside and told us of a couple who had lived in the house in the 1960s. The husband was violent towards his wife, jealous and possessive of her, and every day before work he would lock her in. But not just in the house, he locked her in the attic. A year soon passed, and we still didn't have any money. School life was hard for me. I was bullied constantly for being poor. I was also going through puberty at the time, whilst my mother was going through the menopause. As you can imagine, the air was dense and full of tension. The spirit activity was getting really bad. We were both having bad dreams where a darkness covered us, and we were physically attacked by something invisible. When we awoke, we would find fresh bruises on our thighs. I had the largest bedroom to myself. It was brightly decorated, strewn with soft toys, records, tapes, books, and the walls covered with rock music posters. My mother had the bedroom next to mine, but as a single parent, she would always sleep on the sofa in the living room. The bed would always be made, though, in case we had any visitors staying over. The noises would come from inside that bedroom. There would be whispering, soft moans, and loud bangs. I would turn up my TV to block out the noise and try not to notice the shadow people walking past my door. This would happen on a weekly basis, and we became used to it. On the mornings after a night of such heavy activity, we would look in to find the bedding bunched up in the middle of the bed, fresh stains on the exposed mattress, but no sign of anything leaking from anywhere. We once decided to go to our local church for help, though my mother was not particularly religious and we did not attend church. We spoke with the local vicar, a lovely young man who heard our story and later came to bless the house. After the blessing, all went quiet within the house. So we were totally unprepared when just a few weeks later, all hell broke loose. The smells around the house grew sickening, like hot and fetid sour excrement. The drains were clear, freshly cleaned. It was as though something unseen was breathing its stench in your face. Sometimes there were deep, growling, snorting noises like a pig or boar, and strange scratches. We had taken to sleeping in the living room, on the sofas, with the light on, and would even pray for help. But it only seemed to make whatever it was madder. One day, my mother was washing the windows. The upstairs landing was quite large, and as she was a small lady, she would always use a dining chair to reach the top of the frames. She often did this and was accustomed to it. I was tidying my room and we were chatting while cleaning. Suddenly, there was a loud bang, and I rushed to the landing in time to see my mother and the chair she stood on be pushed so hard that she hit halfway down the flight of stairs, but managed to grab onto the spindles to stop herself falling to the bottom. My mother was very shaken, bruised and battered. We sat and she told me what had happened. She'd heard a whispering. Then suddenly there came a really hard shove to the chair, sending both it and her flying. We would have loved to move out, but we had no money and nowhere to go. Waiting lists for council houses were years long, so we simply did our best. By the time I was 15 years old, we had started going on long walks at night, as it was a rather rural area and always felt safe to us. We would go to friends' houses and only go back to our house to sleep. My mother had a few boyfriends during the time we were living in the house, but they never lasted very long. I don't think they could understand what was going on, or were simply too scared to hang around. There was one boyfriend who actually stood his ground, a lovely man who came to be like a father to me, and for a time, we were almost like a normal family. We were all in bed one night, having recently moved them downstairs into the living room. I was on one side of the large room, asleep in my bed. Mother and her boyfriend were laid in theirs awake and chatting, when they saw what looked like 3 huge tadpoles, each about 3 feet long, sliding and slithering up the bed towards them. The stench and the whispering voices were at their worst. The banging noises started, and the grunting pig sounds were louder than they'd ever been. Then, in the corner near my bed, there appeared a white figure, which looked like the silhouette of a Catholic bishop, wearing his robes with a mitre upon his head. The figure made motions towards me, as though it was placing a blessing on me. My mother screamed. Her boyfriend grabbed me half asleep from my bed and ran us to the local church, where our hammering on the door startled the vicar from his bed at 4 a.m. He took us into the church, up to the altar, where he proceeded to bless each of us, laying his hands on our heads one by one. During the blessing, Mother's boyfriend took on an intensely angry look. Then his legs spasmed, as though trying to spring away from the vicar and his blessing. The vicar told us that I was being kept safe by a holy man. We were shattered as we walked home, not only from lack of sleep, but also weary, so exhausted by what was happening to us. There were times when things got far too much, way out of hand. My mother would change before my eyes, taking on the appearance of an angry old crone who called me Charlotte and said that she wanted to hurt me. By this time, we were in touch with a spiritualist group, and through them we contacted someone they thought could actually help us, an exorcist. He arrived a few days later, a rather normal, soft-spoken man in his 50s, with the appearance and manner of a schoolteacher. He exorcised my mother whilst her boyfriend held her down. It was an awful thing to watch. To our shock and near disbelief, the exorcist told us that the cause of all the happenings was a demon infestation. As the banging, growling and grunting sounded, and the sour stench hung thick in the air, this quiet, nondescript man repeatedly recited his special prayers. Suddenly, while he was speaking, the light in the room changed. The sunlight streamed in. We noticed that all the noises had stopped, and from nowhere, the air was filled with the fresh, clean scent of roses. A couple of years later, when I was 17, we managed to get a housing exchange with a young family. They had a small boy of 5 and were looking for a larger home. We thought that whatever it was that had troubled us had gone, and that they would be safe. A few months later, we began to settle into our new home, albeit in a rougher area. But we were away from that house, and that was good enough for us. One day, there was a knock at the door, and the boy's mother was there. She told us of how she loved the place at first, but her son had started seeing an old woman around the house. And, she said, the worst thing was the staircase. They had child safety gates fitted at both the top and bottom of the stairs, and the boy was playing in his bedroom upstairs one morning when suddenly the mother heard her son cry out in pain. Somehow, the boy had fallen down the stairs and broken his arm, even though the safety gates were still locked closed. As he cried in her arms, he told her that the nasty man had pushed him. She'd come to ask us if anything weird had happened to us there. It's now been over 20 years since these events happened, and I still have nightmares about being back there. But I will admit, I am strangely drawn to that old house, and I wonder, is that thing still there? Was anyone else affected by it? When and why did it even begin to trouble that house? Yes, I'm drawn to that house, but I would never go back there. Would you?
Just hearing you reread that now gave me chills just as much as I did when I saw that in my inbox and first read it.
It's quite shocking, isn't it?
It's an incredible story, and it's odd that it starts in such a familiar way. And when I say familiar, for those of you that remember our interview with Keith Linder, his experiences started in a similar fashion.
Yeah, and indeed, that's something we experienced in the haunted house we lived in ourselves. Now, it never worsened to the extent that either Rachel's or Keith's experiences did. It didn't escalate that far. But again, these common themes of the stomping noises and the whispering, the scratching, the darting shadow figures, we hear that so often.
And even after the situation escalated past what we've experienced, it still seems to follow a similar pattern to a lot of other things that we've heard. The sort of pig noises and the fact that getting a priest in initially calmed things down.
Yeah.
And then after a while it suddenly came back with a vengeance.
And there seemed to be a lot of different strands. It must have been quite confusing to try and figure out the source of this negativity. Because on the one hand, you've got friends and neighbours seeing this friendly looking old lady, but then you're finding out about the fact that she was potentially the victim that was locked in this attic and was a victim of violent abuse by her husband. So is it the perfect storm of just energy from that situation that's causing the problems? or is it more down to one particular spirit? I mean, we'll never know, really. You've also got the additional factors of who in the house it was affecting at the time. It sounded to me quite a lot like your mother's boyfriends were possibly being a focal point of that activity, almost as if the energy of the house was trying to force them away somehow.
There's just so much there to unpack, and I don't think even with an hour we could do it justice.
No.
But Rachel's actually told us that she's going to be writing a book about her experiences, and I would be so fascinated to read that. So I hope that, Rachel, you keep in touch and let us know when that comes out.
Yeah, please do, because as we said with Keith, we do think it's really important to share these stories. And I do think Rachel's very brave for sharing this. This is obviously a very traumatic event. But to somebody that's going through an experience like this at this time, this could be a lifesaver for them. This could really make them feel so much less alone and less confused. So thank you, Rachel, so much for sharing this with us. But now we're going to lighten the mood a little bit and tell you all about our Paranormal Postcards adventure to Blakeney.
Now, when I first heard that we were heading to Blakeney, I was actually quite excited because a friend of mine that lives in Norfolk has been pestering me for a while to investigate the legend of Black Shuck. Black Shuck is the apparition of a huge, shaggy black dog with blazing red eyes who silently prowls the darkness of the fens, except for its blood-chilling howls. The name Shuck is thought to be derived from the Old English skucka or skeoka, meaning evil spirit or demon, and sightings have persisted for hundreds of years. Folklore warns that sighting it foretells the witness's imminent death. Rumour has it that Black Shuck may have even been the inspiration for the Hound of the Baskervilles after Sir Arthur Conan Doyle heard the legend whilst holidaying in Norfolk in 1901. If true, though, it's not known why he changed the setting of the tale to the landscape of Dartmoor. Reports vary. Sometimes Shuck is reported to be headless, sometimes floating on a swirling mist. There are even reports of the creature being more benevolent, a protective presence with large green eyes instead of devilish red. Possibly the most famous account of the Black Shuck dates from August of 1577, when the villagers of Bungay in Suffolk fled to St Mary's Church to escape a terrible storm. While the parishioners were desperately praying for deliverance from the thunder, hail and lightning, a great black hellhound appeared in their midst and tore through the church, attacking the villagers. A clergyman called Abraham Fleming published an account of the incident in a pamphlet entitled A Strange and Terrible Wonder, in which he writes, "Immediately hereupon there appeared in a most horrible similitude and likeness to the congregation then and there present, a dog, as they might discern it, of a black colour, at the sight whereof, together with the fearful flashes of fire which were then seen, moved such admiration in the minds of the assembly that they thought doomsday was already come. This black dog, or the devil in such a likeness, running all along down the body of the church with great swiftness and incredible haste, among the people in a visible form and shape, passed between two persons as they were kneeling upon their knees, and occupied in prayer as it seemed, wrung the necks of them both at one instant clean backward, insomuch that even at a moment where they kneeled they strangely died." Following its massacre of the parishioners at Bungay, Shuck then seems to have moved on to Blytheburgh Church 12 miles away, where it caused similar chaos. Supposedly you can still see black scorch marks on the church door where the beast left its devilish mark, but given the weather conditions at the time, one has to wonder whether this has more to do with the tremendous lightning storm than the fiery mark of a hellhound.
Yeah, I've got to say that given the weather conditions, as you say, during a massive lightning storm, the scorch marks on the church door are probably more to do with the lightning than a hellhound.
Although it does depend where the door is. A lot of churches have sort of archways over the doors, so I wonder whether it would sort of go through that. Mind you, there's a lot of ironwork on them as well. So.
That's true. Yeah, a lot of metalwork. But having said that, that does not detract from the fact that clearly there was some large, unusual, slathering beast running around the church.
Yeah, obviously it could have just been a dog, but I'm sure that,
It could, but it's very unusual for one to burst through the church doors and start mauling people.
And if it did, they'd have said, a dog came in and started eating people and then we shot it, or...
Yeah.
Not shot it in the 1500s, but we stabbed it with a pike.
With a sword, yeah. So, yeah, cryptid, maybe. Hellhound? Not sure. But very interesting nonetheless. Now, the coastal village of Blakeney, where we were headed for the day, has its own fair share of Black Shuck sightings. One witness reported being followed by a huge, silent black dog. She pedalled furiously away from it on her bicycle, only for it to suddenly vanish. And another saw it floating above ground level on an old road that may have once been an Iron Age track. One woman was followed on her walk home by the sound of dragging chains, for which there appeared to be no cause. The sound seemed to pass down Back Lane, which is a well-known haunt of the beast, and realising that she might be in the presence of Black Shuck, she wisely fled, and I don't blame her.
Personally, I think I'd rather face Black Shuck than the Hytersprites.
Yes, the Hytersprites. Now, the Black Shuck is not Blakeney's only, cryptid, if you can call it that. Local folklore tells of the elusive Hytersprites, long-leggedy, spider-like creatures that kidnap naughty children who stray under the salt marshes. But again, you have to wonder how much of that is a cautionary tale, because the salt marshes can be quite deadly. In fact, when we went out there, it's gorgeous. And we parked in the harbour, which is essentially in the sea. There's not many places to park, so we didn't have a lot of choice. And while being beautiful, in a sort of lonely, desolate kind of way, you have to basically check the tide chart to make sure that your car is not going to be washed away by the sea.
Yes, it does say something when you park in a car park and there's a notice saying that we will not be held responsible if your car is washed to sea.
So you can imagine that a creepy creature told to children to be patrolling the salt marshes may have been more of a cautionary tale, and an understandable one at that. So aside from the long-legged beasties and things that go bump in the night, Blakeney is also rather well known for its smuggling connections. Apparently, as with many English coastal towns, smuggling and piracy was rife well up to the 19th century, and the legend goes that a secret network of smugglers' tunnels burrow all the way underneath the town, with several secret entrances and exits, one of which is in the Guildhall, which we visited while we were there. Blakeney Guildhall is a bit of a mystery. Although it's called Guildhall, which is just a name traditionally given to it by the locals, it's not in fact a Guildhall and never has been. They don't really know much about who built it or why. The only thing they do know is that at some point it was owned by a wealthy medieval fish merchant, and on a map of 1682, it's shown to have a second story that was castellated. Unfortunately, that doesn't still stand today, and all that remains is the 14th century brick vaulted undercroft. So what we can glean from that is that basically it was a fish merchant's basement. It could not look less like a basement if it tried. It's really quite cathedral-like inside. It's got this amazing vaulted ceiling, and the room's divided into two aisles by octagonal stone pillars, which makes it look very sort of like a church or a cathedral. There are deep niches cut into the walls, which are window-shaped but seem to serve no purpose, except we do know that there were originally wall paintings in there, but you can't see any trace of them remaining today. It's a very enigmatic place, and it's a little bit eerie, especially with the knowledge that there may be secret tunnels somewhere hidden within the building. And it's made slightly more creepy by the knowledge that during World War I, it was used as a mortuary chapel for the bodies of drowned sailors. Blakeney has one of the classic village signs, and on the sign you can see depicted a fiddler and his dog, and that's where another legend comes in. It's believed that at least one of the smuggling tunnels under Blakeney ran to Binham Priory, which has a long history of being haunted by a ghostly monk who's been seen perambulating along the length of the church wearing a black cowl, and was believed to appear and disappear from one of the smugglers' tunnels. Now, the tale of the ghostly fiddler begins with a man volunteering to explore the tunnels below Binham Priory to investigate the ghostly monk. He played his fiddle as he travelled through the tunnels with his faithful dog by his side, so that the onlookers could track his progress by the sound of his instrument, but partway through, the sound died. The dog eventually emerged terrified and shaking, but the fiddler himself was never seen again and was presumed to have been taken by the phantom of the Black Monk. It's said sometimes, on a quiet night, the eerie strains of fiddler's music can still be heard.
Spooky.
I know.
But it wasn't all doom and gloom. We actually had another reason to be visiting Blakeney, and it was to meet up with Lil's mother for her birthday.
It was, and bless her, we spent the entire day dragging her around dank cellars and looking for devil dogs. She's such a good sport.
But, interestingly, while we were walking around the town looking for somewhere to have lunch, we discovered that Lil's brother had actually had his own paranormal encounter the night before.
He had. They were all staying in the Blakeney Hotel and decided to go for a bit of a wander to explore the area before dinner. So they were walking up the street with the restaurants and eateries on it, and passing some brightly lit windows of a restaurant, he saw, quite clearly, seated at a table, tucking into a meal, himself. He saw his own doppelganger, which understandably was a bit freaky.
What I found particularly interesting was the language he used when describing the event. I believe he said it was as if he was watching himself do something that he hadn't done yet.
Yeah, you're right, actually, which is just classic doppelganger description, really, isn't it? And this is the second time we've had a doppelganger on the show. I do find the subject really fascinating. So if our listeners have any stories about doppelgangers they'd like to share with us, we would love to hear them. Please do send them in.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah. Well, that, unfortunately, is just about all we've got time for. But before we go, we have one more story for you. It's a paranormal blooper from Eleanor Golding in Vancouver.
I've had a few scary paranormal encounters in the place I'm living now that have put me on edge. One of which is an entrance to a crawl space that's been blocked since I moved in. Both my roommate and I have not been able to open it by pushing it with all our might. It does not feel like something is outright blocking the door or that it's locked. Rather, when we go to push it open, it will give way slightly, then get shoved back into place. Almost like someone is noticing that we're trying to open it again and stopping us. It has really been freaking us out, but since nothing bothers us unless we disturb the crawl space, we've elected to ignore it. My roommate left for vacation for a few months, so now it's just me, my cat, and whatever likes to live in our crawl space. The entrance to the space is near our living room, outside my bedroom, and if I did not own my cat, I would definitely close my door at night. But my cat likes to roam around and will wake me up if I try to stop him, so I've been having to deal with my fear of what could be out there, trying to reassure myself that it has not bothered us in all the months we've been living here, so I'm sure it's harmless. Last night, I was on the verge of falling asleep when there was a giant thud that had come from outside my door. It sounded like something giant crashing to the ground. My initial thought was that my cat had knocked something over. All of a sudden, there was a pressure on my foot and I froze. I gathered the courage to look down and I saw that it was my cat, waking from his slumber at the foot of my bed and stretching on my feet. I was reassured that nothing sinister has grabbed my foot, but then that meant something else had caused the crash. My cat leisurely crawled up to my face, noticing I was awake, and kept me company as I tried to gather the courage to check out the sound. Another, smaller thud emanated from the living room. This time my cat froze as well. I thought of the crawl space and worried that my fears had come true, but I knew that if I were to sleep again, I'd have to check it out, so I picked up my cat and we walked over to the living room, turning on every light on the way there. When I rounded the corner, I saw the fan that I'd had going all day to dispel the incoming summer heat had been knocked over. I immediately realised that I'd meant to turn it off because it was sitting precariously on a pile of books and I'd left it on high while the fan turned back and forth. I'd been so freaked out by the crawl space, I'd completely forgotten to turn it off. I honestly believe that this was not paranormal and that I'd just been forgetting. My cat also relaxed and went right back to bed. If I could make just one suggestion to you, Eleanor, get more cats. We've got 4. So if one of them is sat on the end of the bed, you've still got 3 others to blame all the scary noises on.
That is very true. There is a great comfort in having many cats to blame the spooky noises on. Now, I know that was a paranormal blooper, but I have to say it actually still really freaked me out. Well, in fact, was it just a paranormal blooper?
No, you've got something in your cupboard.
And one of the reasons we say this is because we have also had to live with the very spooky crawl space cupboard. When we moved into our particularly haunted house, we lived in one of the loft rooms, and it did have one of these creepy crawl space cupboards in. And some bright spark, when we'd moved in, had taken the sign off of a baked potato oven and put it above the door, and it was henceforth known as the creepy potato cupboard.
Fortunately, nothing ever tried to escape the potato cupboard or prevent us from gaining access to the potato cupboard. But it really does sound like there's something going on there. And if you ever get the chutzpah, then I would say film it. I don't know, poke a camera through or something. I really want to know what's in there.
Or possibly just run away if she's sensible. That would be my first port of call.
I'd want to know what's in it.
You wouldn't in that situation. You'd be running.
No, if it was my house, I'd have boarded it over and put padlocks on it. So it's bravado from across an ocean.
Exactly.
And apologies to Eleanor that I'm afraid my method acting skills don't quite stretch to Canadian females.
Not quite, but I'm afraid Fitz was beginning to feel a little left out that he wasn't getting to read any stories. So, on that note, men, please send in some more stories. We've got lots of lovely ladies sending in their stories for me to read, and poor Fitz is feeling a bit left out. Get those stories in. Eleanor, thank you very much for your paranormal bloopers. We love to hear those. If you've got a paranormal blooper, please do, or any other story, in fact, please do send them in to knockonceforyes.com.
Well, I'm afraid that really is all we've got time for this episode.
But if you want to read the full write-up of our trip to Blakeney and see all the pretty pictures, please head over to the website and check out the Paranormal Postcards blog.
And if you'd like to keep up to date with all our adventures, you can join us on our Facebook page, on Instagram or Twitter, and I'll be putting links to those in the description.
And we even have a spangly new Facebook group where you can come on and chat to ourselves and other like-minded individuals.
So we hope you'll join us next time on Knock Once for Yes.
EVP session end.